Good evening. This is Bernard Green, Chair of the Brookline Select Board. This is the meeting of the Select Board for April 7, 2020. I want to let you know that all board members are attending remotely through our WebEx platform. Before we begin, I want to say a few words on the COVID-19 crisis we face, as I've done at previous meetings. At last night's meeting of the Advisory Council on Public Health, the main message was stay at home. They expressed some concern as to how seriously some people, especially young people, are taking the virus as we enter a period when it is believed that there will be a spike in cases and deaths. They're asking public officials to remind people of that and what it will take to be safe and to lower the trajectory of this disease. Tonight, I want to emphasize that the Brookline Health Department, following guidance from the Centers for Disease Control and the Commonwealth Health Department, is urging everyone to use the next 30 days. Focus on staying inside your homes as much as possible to try to flatten the trajectory of the COVID-19 virus. It is critically important for everyone to follow the guidelines issued by all levels of government and the health community. Let me repeat those guidelines and add some additional ideas and thoughts. First, stay inside. Find things to do while you're inside. In my family, we use internet platforms to have regular meetings with children and other family members and play games like charades. You can have virtual parties with friends in distant places, cocktail parties or tea parties. And you can use the time you are tied up at home to learn something. Boston University School of Public Health has a website with links to interesting and informative online forums. For example, next Thursday, April 9th, they will be hosting a seminar on building the public health system of the future, which is part of their coronavirus seminar series. You can sign up and view the seminar online. Second, as we always say, wash your hands. This shouldn't be something just for the coronavirus, but something that we always do. And use a moisturizer to keep your hands from getting dry and developing cracks in the skin, which gives bacteria and viruses an entry point into your body. If you're out to buy food or medicines, to exercise, or just to keep your sanity, practice robust social distancing. 6 feet is thought to be the range of a cough, but some research is suggesting that 20 or more feet may be necessary to protect against droplets dispersed in a deadly aerosol, a cough, or loud talk. There is now concern that even talking, especially those who don't just say it, but spray it, can propel the virus out of the mouth of even a non-symptomatic person. Brookline's health director, Dr. Swani Jett, and the CDC are now recommending that when you go out in public, that you wear a face covering to protect your mouth and nose, and some form of safety glasses to protect your eyes. A face covering can be a simple face mask, but not a face mask meant for health workers. A folded bandana type of face mask covering will provide some protection from other people's droplets or aerosols and will protect others from your droplets or aerosols. The CDC website has a useful video showing how a bandana and 2 rubber bands can be fashioned into a useful and stylish face mask. Additional protection can be had by incorporating a disposable paper towel into the folds of the bandana. Your eyes are a mucous surface that can give access to your body to a virus. Wear safety glasses, a face shield, or other covering to protect your eyes. And in all situations, be alert to your surroundings. The Select Board and the Town Government of Brookline are urging you to take this virus seriously, because it is a deadly virus. Please follow these guidelines that are designed to reduce the trajectory of the disease and give more of us the opportunity to live to the time when we all can return to normal. I'd also like to use this opportunity to give a shout out and thanks to town employees who are working very hard during this very trying period, either at home or in their office. That includes the Public Works Department, sanitation, water and sewer, transportation, our parks crew. All of their services are required no matter what the crisis that we may be in. To our police and fire, to our emergency management and other EMS and other dispatchers, to our public health department staff and building department staff, which includes inspectors who go out and inspect the restaurants and grocery stores and make sure that they are complying with our distancing and other safety requirements, as well as they go out and inspect construction sites. And let's not forget the cleaning and maintenance crews in all of our buildings, because although people may not be there, there's still a need to maintain those buildings in a safe and clean manner. So we'd like to thank all of these town staff people who are providing incredible services to the town during this crisis period. And of course, we want to give a special thanks to our town administrator and our assistant town administrator, Devin Williams, who are particularly helpful to the board, allowing us to continue to carry on as a functioning board, a select board, during this period. So those are my statements. Are there other comments or updates that board members want to make at this time?
I have 2.
Okay, Ms. Hamilton.
One came up last week during our select board meeting about the intention or inquiry around a blood drive and partnering with a hospital. I do have an update, and you can definitely go to our official website, brooklinecovid19.com. The hospital decided to go in a different direction, and there is a donation site that's being set up at Gillette Stadium next week. They also have a website dedicated, but you can find more information about how to give blood at brooklinecovid19.com. The other update that I would like to talk about is a virtual town hall regarding the faith communities throughout the town. I've reached out to several organizations. Passover is starting this week and going into next week, so we're aiming for the morning of the 22nd, and more to come on that over the next week or so.
Thank you. Any other announcements or updates?
You're muted, Nancy.
Nancy? Oh, Mr. Franco.
Well, I saw Nancy speaking, but she was muted. So while she unmutes herself, I'll give a quick update. Just to update this board and the community about the efforts to craft a virtual town meeting, excuse me, at the end of June. I've got Select Person Hamilton's update on my mind right now. The working group, the virtual town meeting working group met last night. We're slated to meet again on April 16th, and we're still in the process of doing an evaluation, an assessment of WebEx, this platform, versus Zoom, and trying to determine roles and responsibilities and develop a little bit of a training proposal for how we're going to get those town meeting members, the most important members of town meeting, trained on how to use the platform and all in furtherance of trying to get the meeting to go smoothly and be productive.
Great, thank you.
And I'll add that I actually filled out the survey. The committee has sent a message, I assume, to all town meeting members. The survey takes, 5 minutes, and it's worth doing it so the committee can move ahead expeditiously with their work. What I wanted to say before is that the town has posted on its COVID website, COVID-19, a notice about the census, and we're trying to send that out in other ways as well. So you may get it more than once, and we apologize for that. But it's very, very important that you fill out this census. What I'd like to say about it, and Raul and I have been working with the Census Complete Count Committee to make sure that we're all counted in Brookline, but you can help. It only takes 10 minutes to complete the census. If you have your card, or you can go online, and there on the notice that we're sending you, there's the link to the Census Bureau, as well as by mail or over the phone. It's the census, you can fill out the census in 12 different languages, all residents, and that means everyone. It doesn't just mean citizens. It means everyone who's here, no matter whether they're a citizen, whether they have a green card, whether they're undocumented, or whatever. If they're here, they get counted. And they should also remember to count all the children, the infants, the older people, everyone who is in their household. And if there's a lease and people aren't on the household, they still should be counted in the numbers. The collection date for the information has been extended to August 14th, so that you have time, but we would urge you to do it as soon as possible while you're remembering and while you're hearing this notice. And the reason it's so important is that it determines several things. First of all, it determines our representation in Congress and how many representatives we'll have in the state. It also determines how many votes we'll have in the Electoral College, and also representation in state and local government. But the most important reason in my mind is that it also is the basis for how much federal funds Brookline and other is entitled to in areas like schools, childcare, roads and bridges, public transportation, public health. So it's very, very important that you do it. If you're too busy with your kids during the day and you want to call the Census Bureau, we have a number there, and it's available until 1 a.m. in the morning. So you should be able to make that time frame. So please, please, please fill out your census. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me add to that the fact that many people who are undocumented may have fear about talking to a federal agency, but we should be aware of the fact that the census data is very, very confidential and is subject to very, very strong protections against its use by any other federal agencies. And as I understand, this has been tested even against Patriot Act attempts to get into the data. So, people should not be afraid whether they're undocumented or for other reasons don't want to have their name too far out into public agencies.
That's correct. Thank you for that additional information. I forgot to mention that it's fully protected by law, and it cannot be used for any other purpose other than collecting information and statistics about your situation, such as your marital status, your race, etc. And it's only used for the purpose of, as I said before, The number of people is used for the representation in Congress and other elected bodies, and also for federal funding. And that's why they need to collect information about your age or your ethnicity, etc., because programs are focused on those things, and the federal dollars will come to us in Brookline. Schools and childcare are really important. So it's very, very important that you fill it out. There are fines and prison terms for people who use the information incorrectly. I'm convinced that cannot happen very much with the kinds of protections that the Census Bureau has put in place. So I would urge you to fill it out.
Thank you. Ms. Fernandez, you have some updates or announcements.
I sure do. And before I launch in, I'll just say that the website, and if you do this right now, the chances are you can complete the census before we even finish our announcements and maybe even public comment. You go to my2020census.gov. That's the letters my2020census.gov. You can do that census right now. As of yesterday morning's Complete Count Committee meeting, we were just a 0.5 percentage point behind Massachusetts as a state in terms of the percent of residents that have completed the census. We want to be ahead of where the state is. So if you can help us out, if you haven't done that yet, please do it while we're on this call today. Really appreciate that. Launching into some other updates, I have 3. The first is that this past Friday, the Select Board, in working with the Brookline Asian American Family Network, hosted a virtual town hall. It was called Supporting Our Neighbors, Combating Anti-Asian Racism in Brookline and Beyond in the Age of COVID-19. That was co-hosted by leadership from the Brookline Asian American Family Network, including Chi-Chi Wu and Dr. Chris Chanya-Solkit, as well as guest speaker, Professor Andrew Leung from UMass Boston, a Brookline resident, who really talked about anti-Asian racism and xenophobia that has existed in the U.S. and elsewhere for much of our world's history, but also what is unique about this time here during COVID-19. It was a really great conversation. There were lots of questions asked, and you know, we hope to continue this kind of engagement in other ways, and it's really important. If folks want to see that, I believe the Brookline Interactive Group will be posting that at some point on their YouTube channel. I also want to thank Representative Tommy Vitolo for joining us, and of course members of the Select Board who were with us as well as we co-hosted this event. So that's one. Second, we are hosting our 4th now virtual town hall for Brookline's small business and nonprofit community. It's going to be this Thursday from 9 to 10 a.m. We'll be joined once again by our Economic Development Team, Director Kara Bruton, and Economic Development Planner Meredith Mooney, to answer all the questions that folks in the business and nonprofit community, including business owners, nonprofit managers, and employees, may have about the impacts of COVID-19. We have a Zoom link. You can look in our calendar for that, but you can also just watch it live at brooklineinteractive.org/live. Once again, shout out to our friends at Brookline Interactive Group for giving folks access to this meeting, that meeting, and so many others. And my last update is related to the Safety Net Fund. We made an announcement last week that the town was contributing $175,000 to this important fund. This is a fund that was created by the Brookline Community Foundation and is expertly administered by the Brookline Center. It provides currently up to $1,000 per person for rent, utilities, food, and other essentials. This is for anyone who lives, works, or attends school in Brookline. That means that in addition to Brookline residents, small business owners, employees, and MECO families are eligible, all regardless of documentation status. So anyone who's undocumented is, of course, welcome to request these funds. Those in need of support should call the Brookline Center at this number. It is 617-277-8107. I'll read it again. That is 617-277-8107. And assistance is available in multiple languages. I did want to also provide an update on our fundraising efforts to date for this fund. So since March 13th, just over $95,000 has been raised from 213 individual donations. That is separate and aside from the town contribution. So that's just over $95,000 from 213 donations. 42% of those donations came within the last 7 days, and that is accounting for 64% of the total amount raised. That is that's a good start, I'll say, but the need is really great, and we need to do so much more as a community. There were 89 donations this week. I would love to announce next week that we've doubled that number. So if you can actually go, no amount is too small. Even if you can just give a little bit, please do. For those seeking to give, you can go to brooklinecommunity.org. Once again, that's brooklinecommunity.org. Just click on the COVID-19 response right there on the webpage. You can't miss it. So brooklinecommunity.org. And once again, for those in need of support, please call the Brookline Center at 617-277-8107. This is a real opportunity for our entire community to come together and help those most in need. So I hope you'll give if you can. So thank you.
Other comments or updates from select board members?
Mr. Chair, could I make some comments? This is Mel Fleckner.
Sure.
I wanted to supplement a few comments that the board has made. But first, I want to update the board and the community that we have hired on a temporary basis a professional to help out with the town clerk's office and the upcoming town election, which has been postponed until June 9th. We've retained Jeffrey Nutting. Mr. Nutting is a long-standing Massachusetts local government executive who has served in a number of capacities and most recently retired as the town manager in Franklin, Massachusetts. And Jeff has joined our team working with Linda Goldberg to make sure that the town clerk's office is providing essential services during this emergency, but more importantly, making sure that the election is scheduled and handled in the proper way to meet the goals of this board, which is to maximize non-physical voting, absentee voting by mail, and also to make any physical voting that has to happen as safe for both the residents of the town as well as the poll workers. So I just wanted to mention that. I also would like to say that I've spoken to Pat Ward, our town clerk, now twice over the last week. I was really happy to hear from Pat and talk to him. He's entered his rehab phase, which is going to be a long haul, so I don't think we can expect Pat to be actively involved, but he definitely wants to stay informed, and I've been keeping him informed of how things are going. So it was good always to hear from Pat Ward. I did want to pick up on your comments, Mr. Chair, and I know that Select Board Member Hamilton was involved in preparing those comments in recognition of town employees. Really so proud of our employees in all factors, but certainly those who are on the front lines who are having to get out there every day to provide services physically, public works and the building inspectors, public health officials, and of course our police, fire, and our EMS partner, Fallon Ambulance, our public safety dispatchers, and so many more. I think we'll have more to say on that in the future, but I didn't want to go another week to go by without saying how much we're appreciating our employees during this crisis. The third thing I wanted to mention was that I released today a memorandum discussing the budget. I know there's a lot of people who are very concerned about how the town's budget will be impacted by the economic impacts of this crisis. And I can assure everyone that we're very cognizant of those and have begun to try to get a handle on it. But I will say that information is pretty elusive at this point. We need more time to really understand the impacts and to prepare a plan going forward. But that is our intent. And I did send that memorandum around today, and perhaps by next week we could have some further discussions along with the advisory committee. I also want to mention that we have been notified that the town will be a recipient of a supplemental CDBG, or Federal Community Development Block Grant funds. We are slated to receive an additional $800,000 in federal CDBG funding within the next few weeks. And of course, we expect to use those for what they're intended to, which is to help people who are low and moderate income people, or people who are disproportionately impacted by the situation we face ourselves with today. So we'll have more to say on that, and ultimately the select board will make the decision how to allocate those funds. And then finally, I wanted to mention that the state legislature and the governor signed a bill that would provide some relief to Brookline or all local government taxpayers and people who are having a hard time meeting their obligations to the town. I will talk about that in more detail when we're talking about mitigation activities related to COVID-19. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Great, thank you. So we have not received any sign-ups for comments, but if anyone has joined since we've started the meeting and would like to make a comment, please indicate so by raising your hand. It's in the chat room. And you do that by clicking on the hand raise icon in that chat room. Devin, are we receiving any indication of interest to comment? No. Wait a few seconds. Apparently no one has raised their hand. Okay. Next, miscellaneous, approval of miscellaneous items, licenses, vouchers, and contracts. Question of approving the minutes of March 31st, 2020. Any corrections to those minutes? Hearing none. I move approval of the minutes of March 31st, 2020. All in favor, Mr. Franco?
Aye.
Ms. Heller? I see she said aye, even though her microphone is muted. Ms. Hamilton.
Now.
Okay.
Aye.
Hamilton. Mr. Fernandez.
Aye.
You're muted. I saw you said aye.
Yeah. Aye.
Yeah, we somehow mysteriously get muted. I don't know.
Okay. And chair votes aye. Next, question of accepting a gift of an inclusive piece of play equipment from the Play Brigade to be used at the Longwood Playground / Lawrence Field. The carousel's estimated value is $13,000. We all saw it in our packet. It's an incredibly great gift for that community, the entire community. You bring kids, for example, in wheelchairs into the play area and being able to play with their friends on the same type of equipment as others are. Is Ms. Galentine on the
Good evening, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Wonderful. So Erin Galentine, Director of Parks and Open Space. It is great to see you all safe and well, and I'm glad to have be bringing a little bit of good news. Play Brigade has made another very generous donation to the town of an inclusive carousel. The site selected is Longwood Playground, which also serves the Lawrence School. We have a perfect site for it. The principal, facilities director, and superintendent are very excited about this opportunity. And I think we would install this piece over the summer and make some really tremendous improvements just in terms of overall inclusion for the Lawrence School and Longwood Playground overall.
Yeah. Can you tell the audience something about Play Brigade? Who are they and why are they so generous?
Thank you very much for asking. The Play Brigade is a nonprofit organization dedicated to creating opportunities for inclusive play, recreation, and sports where everyone participates and belongs regardless of age or ability. It was founded by Dawn Oates, who is a Brookline resident. She is incredibly passionate about the mission, about this organization, and has done a lot of good in programming and helping construct and design places and spaces for individuals of all ages, kind of with play and community connection in mind around inclusivity. So Dawn is an incredible force And we're very lucky to have not only her generosity, but also her expertise in town.
Was she also involved with the inclusive play equipment at the Brookline Avenue Playground?
Yes. So Dawn was part of our design review team in helping us design Brookline's first inclusive playground, and donated the Play Brigade, her foundation, donated an inclusive carousel for that playground.
Well, we all appreciate that, and her contributions to making Brookline not only an inclusive place for adults, but also for all children in the playground. So any questions from the select board?
No, I'll just express my thanks and the thanks of the Commission for the Disabled, who's taken up this very topic several times over the last several years. So I think I'm excited to see this piece of equipment unveiled, and I know the community is as well.
Great.
I just want to say two things. One, I have started to use the Longwood playground park because I live on Longwood a lot more now that we're socially distancing. And I think it's a perfect opportunity for this particular structure. And I was at the unveiling at the Brookline Avenue when that opened, and it was just wonderful to see all of the children and their adult companions be able to participate using that piece of equipment. It really was so inspiring.
I just wanted to add my thanks to Play Brigades, but also to Dawn Oates. I mean, just one of the many amazing people in Brookline that are doing such good for us, but also for communities outside of Brookline. So thank you. This is great.
Great.
Agreed.
Okay. So any other questions or comments? Hearing none, I move approval of the question of accepting a gift of an inclusive, I move approval of accepting a gift of an inclusive piece of play equipment from the Play Brigade to be used at the Longwood Playground, Lawrence School. The carousel's estimated value being $13,000. All in favor, Mr. Franco?
Aye.
You're muted, you said aye. Ms. Heller?
Aye.
Ms. Hamilton?
Aye.
Mr. Fernandez?
Aye.
And chair votes aye. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Galantine.
Thank you all. Be well.
Next, question of renewing the 2020 seasonal alcoholic beverages license for Grill on the Green, Inc., doing business as the Vine Ripe Grill at 1281 West Roxbury Parkway. Any questions about that?
I would just say, Mr. Chair, that this is one of our few seasonal licenses, which does not count towards our quota. So we like to have seasonal licenses, and this is because of the seasonal nature of the golf course. So their seasonal license is up, and although the golf course is not open quite yet, this is in order at this time.
Great.
They're not serving while the golf course is closed, correct?
I believe they may be having some takeout. I thought I may have seen some of that, but I can't honestly tell you. I've seen a couple of ads from Vine Ripe, so I wouldn't be surprised if they're doing some delivery or takeout service.
Okay, but not having anyone come and yeah.
But the golf course, as I understand, is open for people to just walk the course.
That's right. We're not allowing golf play at this time, but we're treating the golf course like a park where people can do passive recreation, walk, and run through there.
And there's plenty of room to keep your distance there. So I move approval of the renewal of the 2020 seasonal alcoholic beverages license for Grill on the Green, doing business as Vine Ripe at 1281 West Roxbury Parkway. All in favor, Mr. Franco?
Aye.
Ms. Heller?
Aye.
Ms. Hamilton?
Aye.
Mr. Fernandez?
Aye.
And chair votes aye.
Can I, Bernard, I just have a question. There was a comment from the fire department in that license. So I just want to make sure that that vote incorporated that we were going to have the fire department have a conversation with the owner about the concerns that they raised.
Okay. Mr. Kleckner, would you make sure that that happens?
I will.
And I guess, are you saying that our vote should be contingent on that being completed, Mr. Franco?
I don't think so, because the fire department raised issues about the hood, which doesn't seem to be related to the liquor license.
Right.
And I think it's just an administrative matter. It doesn't need to be conditioned. The
Okay.
vote doesn't need to be conditioned.
So, Mr. Kleckner, can you just inform the board that that's been completed once it's been completed?
I will.
Okay, thank you. Next, MSBA, next to calendar, review and potential vote on calendar items. MSBA Peer School Building Committee, question of revising the composition of the MSBA Peer School Building Committee to replace Mr. Franco with Bernard Green, me. Any questions? As you know, we're losing Mr. Franco, who was our designee to the building committee for the Pierce School.
And
At some point in the future, some undetermined point in the future.
Well, June 9th, the election is on June 9th now, so.
So far.
You hope.
Yeah.
I think that this switch makes a lot of sense now, given that now just a couple of weeks ago, we voted approval of the MSB, a partnership with the MSBA and the Peer School, and there's going to be a flurry of activity with the building committee and the project going forward, and it makes sense to have some continuity around this board's representative to the
Right.
building committee.
Any other questions? Okay, I move approval of revising the composition of the MSBA Pierce School Building Committee to replace Mr. Franco with Mr. Green. All in favor, Mr. Franco?
Aye.
Ms. Heller?
Aye.
Ms. Hamilton?
Aye.
Fernandez?
Aye.
And chair votes aye. Next, warrant articles. 5:30, this is a public hearing. Our first virtual public hearing. Public hearing and possible vote on the following warrant articles for the 2020 annual town meeting. Article 18, to accept the Mass General Laws Affordable Housing Trust statute. And Article 19, to amend Section 3.13 of our bylaws related to the Housing Advisory Board. Mr. Kleckner, do you want to fill us in on this?
Yes, I would. So we have had for many years an affordable housing trust fund, and a bylaw that regulates it. As we began to deal with the Newbury development issue, we wanted to make sure we were looking into this housing trust fund, and we determined that there is another vote that would be advisable to legitimize this fund. There is, since the town created it, there has been a special act, or excuse me, a general law passed by the legislature, and we'd like to put our fund in conformance with that law. It really is housekeeping, but given the fact that the Newbury College issues are going on, and that the housing fund is a part of that, we thought it would be appropriate to take these on at this time rather than defer them, even though it is a technical and housekeeping article. So what the bylaw does, or what these two articles do, Article 18 formally accepts the general law of the Commonwealth that gives cities and towns the ability to have an affordable housing trust, and 19 would just amend our current law.
Okay, is Roger Blood a participant in this meeting? No, apparently not. I have one question, and I think I know the answer, but I just wanted to make sure that everyone else is aware of this. So we're proposing removing the income category upper moderate from the purposes of HAB, which seems to me would be excluding a significant number of town workers who wouldn't be low income, but would be at low enough income to require housing assistance to live in Brookline. From what I understand, this may be necessary in order to comply with the terms of the state law. But is there anything else we need to know about this?
Well, that's correct. Perhaps town council or someone from the Housing Advisory Board can speak up. But my understanding is that we're trying to get in conformance with the state law, and that to the extent that we need to vary from that, we'd have to do a special act in the future. But we didn't have time to do that. We felt it was important to put this. The first step is to put it into conformance with state.
So I hope that we keep our eye on the goal of also providing means for our town employees to have a chance to live in Brookline, where they work, through workforce housing, which would be, I assume, upper moderate income, or maybe 120% of average medium income in the area medium income. Anyway, that's just my point to make. Any other questions?
My reading of this is that we're also talking about expanding the membership of this committee to include a member of this board, and I just looking for confirmation that I did in fact read the proposed bylaw correctly.
Hi, this is Virginia, the senior housing planner for the town of Brookline, and I just want to let you know that we will change the town bylaws in 3 small ways to conform with the state statute under these 2 warrant articles. One is that, as Bernard pointed out, we will be serving households earning up to 100% of area median income. Currently, our housing trust allows us to use funds to serve households earning up to 120%. But we have done that very rarely at this point. It does also, as you pointed out, Selectman Franco, that we adds a select board member to the Housing Advisory Board. We felt very strongly that we had an excellent level of expertise on the Housing Advisory Board, and that we didn't want to cut the numbers, but we would add a select board member to the Housing Advisory Board in order to be consistent with state statute. And then the only other thing that changes is that the term for Housing Advisory Board members would change from a 3-year term to a 2-year term. And just to remind the select board, 5 of the members of the Housing Advisory Board are appointed by the select board. There is a representative from the Housing Authority as well as the Planning Board.
Great. So this is a public hearing. First of all, any other questions or comments from the select board? Okay, this is a public hearing.
Bernard, I want to ask a question.
Yeah.
So there are 5 members of the HAB now. If we add a select board member, that would mean 6, which would be an even number in terms of the ability to vote and not have a tie. So is there any thought to give into figuring out how to deal with that problem?
Just a quick correction. There are actually 7 members now. And so, but it's still, it would make it an even number by adding a select board member. I will say that we have some very busy people on the Housing Advisory Board that do this professionally, do affordable housing professionally, and it's very rare that we get a quorum. We haven't had a problem so far. But I don't know.
You don't mean a quorum. You mean 100% attendance. If you have
Correct.
a quorum, you really can't.
I'm sorry,
conduct
that's what I
business.
meant.
Yeah.
Right, of course, but
I'll just say, I think there's, to Ms. Bullock's point, there's 5 appointed members of the Housing Advisory Board. Then there's a member of the Planning Board, representative of the Housing Authority, and now we're talking about adding an eighth person, a member of this board. I'm in support of this. I think there's a nexus here between this this warrant article and a recommendation from BFAC, recommendation 7, that said the select board should have be more involved in some of these committees, and there should be somebody who's really day-to-day a designee of the select board, really responsible for these sets of issues. And I think, again, this is in keeping with that recommendation.
Great.
I'll also point out that there is precedent from one of our most important boards, the Transportation Board, that has an even number. And sometimes it forces more interesting discussion and recommendations because it takes a little bit more to get to that majority vote.
Can I say something, Devin? I think our screens are frozen. Do other people have frozen screens?
No, and Devin muted.
Bernard, I've actually lost my visual on you.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So you might want to leave the meeting and rejoin, but I mean, your audio is still completely, working. So that's up to you.
How do I do that? My screen is frozen. Can't do anything.
I will troubleshoot that.
Maybe you should designate another board member to just run the meeting while you're getting in and out, out and in.
Or why don't I just participate by voice? Are you seeing my movements?
No, I've lost the ability to control you as well. Like it's as if you're out of the meeting.
Okay. So I'll get out. Mr. Franco, do you want to carry on?
Sure, I will be your fill-in temporarily.
Okay, we have to take public comments. This is a public hearing.
Yeah, I noticed that Mr. Blood made a comment in the chat. So why don't we circle back and see if we can hear from him. Apparently not. Why don't you write a comment in the chat, Roger, if you've got something to say, and we'll read it out when we see it. Are there members of the public that want to comment on this? If you do, just use the raise your hand function in the participants area, the attendees area, and we'll bring you up and hear your comment.
I just noticed, this is Mel, I just noticed that Mr. Blood just wanted to indicate that he was in concurrence with the comments that were made by Virginia, both his staff member.
Perfect, thank you for that. Do other board members have questions, comments about this warrant article?
No, I'll just say, this is important that we that we get this done, and I do think, as the chair mentioned before, that that we should have further conversations in the future about support for workforce housing in all the different ways that we can. So I look forward to having those conversations in the future.
Ditto.
Do board members feel like they're prepared to vote on this warrant article and make a recommendation?
Do we have any public comment?
I asked for it once. I didn't see anything.
We have 15 attendees currently in this meeting, and no one has indicated to me via chat or using the hand raise feature that they would like to comment on this item. Did want to make you all aware that in the comment section, Roger Blood said this is also a good idea in anticipation of CPA passage that will also generate revenue to the trust fund.
In the hope for CPA passage.
Correct. We cannot currently accept CPA funds into the housing trust, but once this is adopted, we will be able to. If it passes it.
Yeah, if it passes.
Right.
Okay, any other comments at this public hearing? Ben, you're released from duty. I'm back. Any other comments, Heather? I'm sorry, Devin. You're right in the middle of my screen, Heather.
I think just so you know, Bernard, everybody
Go ahead.
said that they'd be willing to vote on this tonight if you're so inclined.
Okay, let's vote. I move favorable action on Articles 18 and 19. 18, amending Master General Law's Affordable Housing Trust, ceding to that statute, and Article 19, amending 3.13 of bylaws related to the Housing Advisory Board. All in favor? Can we? Do you mind doing both of them together? Okay, so both together. All in favor, Mr. Franco?
Aye.
Ms. Heller?
Aye.
Ms. Hamilton?
Aye.
Fernandez?
Aye.
And chair votes aye. Next. Mitigation activities related to COVID-19. Question of adopting an order restricting evictions and other real estate activity. Mr. Kleckner, do you want to
Yes.
present on that?
Yes, I will. It was about a few days ago that we received a concern from one of our residents in our community who rents an apartment and was concerned with some potential landlord activity about holding showings in that particular apartment during this period of time. There was a possibility that the lease might not be extended or renewed, so the landlord was making some efforts at trying to market the unit and have people come into the unit while the current tenant was living there. And for obvious reasons, that would be problematic these days when we're trying to experience social distancing and actually isolating to some extent in apartments or homes. So we found that both the city of Somerville and the city of Cambridge have adopted orders similar to that, and so we took both of those orders and kind of melded the best of both into one order, which is in front of you. So I want to be clear that the order really involves two things. One is that situation we talked about, which would prohibit a landlord from entering or showing an apartment while there was a tenant living there, but it also provides some tenant protections for eviction. We were hoping, and I was expecting, that the state legislature would have passed that aspect of things with a bill, and I believe they still will, but to my knowledge, that has not passed yet. And so I believe that the order that's in front of you tonight should be done, and to the extent that it's an aspect is superseded by a new state law, that's fine. But we think it's appropriate to pass this order, and clearly the Public Health Department is supportive of that. And in the preliminary recitations in the order, it talks about the current health crisis and the negative aspects of evictions and the other activities we were just talking about. You have in front of you a proposed order.
So this wouldn't restrict any online showings. It's just in-person entrance into rental units for the purpose of showing or doing non-emergency improvements to a unit. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
That also means that people, if you own a home and are in the process of trying to sell that home, you could still do showings in a home that you own, just not in units where someone else is a tenant or someone else is renting. I'll just say briefly, I think this is the right move. It's actually unthinkable that that real estate agents are currently either are doing this or considering in the near future bringing people into others' apartments during this time. I mean, it's completely inconsistent with all the guidance that we've gotten from the federal, state, and here at Brookline level. So I think this is the right move at the right time, and look forward to supporting this.
I would agree with that. I understand the anxiety of homeowners who have their properties up for sale to continue to show them, but they've got to do it in ways that are safe for themselves and for the public. So I agree. I think this is the right move.
Bernard, you're muted.
Okay, I move approval of adopting an order restricting evictions and other real estate activity as in our packet. All in favor, Mr. Franco?
Aye.
Ms. Heller?
Aye.
Ms. Hamilton?
Aye.
Mr. Fernandez?
Aye.
And chair votes aye. Next, question of considering and possibly voting on a proposal to expand the public sidewalk and other public areas to accommodate COVID-19 social distancing guidelines. We've gotten a lot of emails on this. Some were basically just templates put out by the biking community. Others were specific concerns or suggestions raised by people. On the one hand, they were in favor of this idea. On the other hand, we got a number of emails, including from medical people opposing this as a way of sort of encouraging people to get out and be in the streets with the risk of increasing congregating and other activities that we're trying to discourage. Last night at the Advisory Council on Public Health's meeting, there was discussion of this proposal, at least the proposal in general, before this email from Todd Corain came out that we received dated April 7, the special meeting of the Transportation Board. The Advisory Council was not positively inclined with respect to this proposal. Their position, I think, could be characterized as we're trying to get people not to spend a lot of time outside, to stay home, and this would be a way of encouraging people to get out and congregate with other people in a way that could be relatively unsafe. So I think that's where we are. We're looking at a memorandum from Todd Corain proposing 3 different options with not exclusive of each other, but 3 different options that could be applied. Mr. Kleckner, do you want to go over this or?
Yeah, I would like to just provide a little bit more context and before the board begins its discussion. So actually, the board talked about this last week because this is a proposal, or at least an idea that has been brewing for a while, for a few days. And the board did have some discussions about it, and I conveyed to Todd Corain, through him to the Transportation Board, that the board would appreciate some guidance on this matter. And as it turns out, the Transportation Board couldn't meet until tomorrow evening. So the Transportation Board is meeting tomorrow evening and has this on their agenda. But I think it's important that the board have some discussion about it. And quite honestly, I think the Transportation Board is deferring more to the policy guidance of the Select Board to balance some of the issues that you're hearing about. But let me, first of all, I think I do want to echo your comments, Mr. Chair. You know that we believe, I believe you all believe, that there is a lot of movement in this community that really needs to be reduced. We know it's very difficult to be at home all the time, especially with young children or for active people. But from my perspective, the kind of activity I'm seeing in this community and other places where as I travel around, really is a lot of non-essential travel. I think there's a lot of exercising going on and recreating, which is good. I question whether it's good in areas where other people are doing it, and maybe that's difficult in an urbanized community like ourselves. But I would have to say that in general, staff and our public health people believe there's too much movement going on in this community. Having said that, we're a different community, and most of our commercial food establishments and other establishments that are considered essential are in our commercial centers. And people in Brookline walk and bike to those places. It's obviously very congested in certain areas. And we believe that there's probably merit to extending the sidewalk in safe ways to accommodate that. So I obviously want Dr. Jett to speak up and others, but my own feeling is that we think that there is some merit in the first idea of expanding sidewalks in congested commercial areas by essentially extending the sidewalk into the paved area and then creating parking and travel, vehicular travel after that. I will say, I speak for myself, that number 2 and 3, number 2 relates to creating more streets around parks to have people walk around. And then the third is actually closing streets, local streets, to allow neighborhoods more opportunity to play and recreate in the streets. I don't think we're ready for number 2 and 3 personally. That's my own personal feeling. And I would like the Transportation Board to give that some more thought, and they're having public input tomorrow night, so we can hear more about that. But I certainly feel that there is some merit in talking about the proposal to expand sidewalk areas in certain areas, and I think we'd like to focus on that at least to start. We have members of transportation staff here. Our town council is on the line, and I'm not sure who else, but however you want to proceed at this point, Mr. Chair.
Well, first of all, any comments from the select board? Maybe that's one way to start.
I'm happy to share. Oh, Heather, you go first, please.
Oh, thank you. I actually don't have that much to say. I really enjoyed reading the memo prepared by the transportation administrator. Really thorough job of what we have the ability to enact. And I am anxious to hear what people have to say at the Transportation Board tomorrow. So I could be convinced to just vote on the first proposal. I know that it's going to be a delicate balance to try to accommodate the drop-off pickup for businesses that are allowing for online deliveries. So at first glance, I didn't really see that necessarily addressed in the memo. So if transportation staff could just quickly say that they thought of that, it shouldn't be a problem.
Mr. Corain, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, sure. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So we did look at, when considering option number 1, which is strategy number 1, I should say, which was to try to meet the commuting and sort of essential trip demand of this, based on the request we got from the town administrator to look at the different options and prepare a memo for the Transportation Board and also the Select Board on this. We actually did reach out and look at the 15-minute drop-off zones that we created for those restaurants doing takeout and delivery. And we also looked at other businesses in the area that might be staying open to pick up sort of online ordering, those types of things, not retail customers in their establishments. And we were very careful to, if you notice Harvard Street in general, we sort of, we only recommend removing 1 lane of parking. So anywhere on Harvard Street, one lane of parking does stay. And we actually moved that lane twice, from the eastern curb to the western curb and then back to the eastern curb, to jog around those 15-minute delivery areas that were set up as best we could. So we did take into, and we even identified businesses that were staying open, that were restaurants that don't have the dedicated takeout, and we made sure to move away from those areas as well. So we did that throughout the 4 different plans, the Longwood Avenue, which is mainly residential, Brookline Avenue, which is actually mainly parkland abutting, Harvard Street, which is the main sort of corridor with businesses. Again, we leave parking on one side. And on the Beacon Street plan, we actually don't remove any parking. We just bring the automobiles travel down from 2 lanes to 1 lane. So we're able to keep parking, create the pedestrian space, and keep the motor vehicle travel lane.
Thank you.
Can I just make a couple of comments here? I'm concerned, as Mr. Kleckner said, and as the Public Health Council has reiterated, that this will be seen as an opportunity to engage in, going outside and, having social contacts with people, even if they are social distancing. I think that's the wrong message. The message should be, we recognize that our people need to go to their essential services. They need to go to the grocery stores and the pharmacies and pick up takeout food. And so it's for the purpose of that. It's not for the purpose of people engaging in recreation on our busy commercial streets. For that, they need to be going to parks where there, hopefully there aren't very many people, or biking on streets where there is very, very low traffic, that kind of thing. So I think that if we do adopt something, it has to be with the message of the reason is for accessing commercial essential services without and being able to maintain the 6-foot distancing. And I would also urge that we adopt some sort of guidance about, unless we do something stronger for everyone, the people that got the guidance that people wear face masks, and that they obviously keep to the social distancing standard. So that's my initial thought now, because I am concerned, from what I understand from the medical personnel who've weighed in on this, that it could be dangerous, especially in the next 2 to 3 weeks, which is when we expect a spike in numbers of cases. And that we really want to keep down if we can.
Oh, there you go, Bernard.
I just wanted to ask Mr. Corain whether they had looked at not just the issue of people picking up at establishments, but deliveries of groceries, medicines, etc. How would any of these proposals impact the ability of those delivery drivers to deliver their goods?
Right. So again, for the Harvard Street and the Beacon Street, we don't remove any. We always allow parking on Harvard Street. We have parking on every block. It's just which side the parking is legal, which is in accordance with most streets in Brookline. We only have parking on one side. Beacon Street, in the section that we identified in strategy number 1, which is just from Center Street to Pleasant Street, that sort of congested Coolidge Corner area where Trader Joe's is, we don't remove any parking. The parking lane exists there. The only place in strategy number 1 where we look to remove parking would be Longwood Avenue. However, I don't think anyone, if there's a short-term delivery that's going to take place, I don't imagine that every day we have UPS trucks or those types of trucks pull next to a curb where they're not supposed to be to make a quick delivery. So I don't think it's going to be so much action that there's going to create that much conflict between the pedestrians and a delivery of groceries, let's say, which is typically a quick 5-minute. Now they're a quick 5-minute no touch drop off taking place. So I think that's, not as big of a concern as one would think.
And I'll just point out that most of those establishments had to come up with a delivery plan when they first opened and came before us, because we usually ask them, where do you plan on your deliveries coming? Please don't use Beacon Street.
And I've got some thoughts, but just on that point there, I thought that the map that Todd, that you prepared was very helpful to understand where currently open businesses are compared to where you would be sort of taking away parking and adding space for people to walk and or bike. So I think that was really helpful to understand that it's going to have limited, even in the case of Otto, for instance, you said there were 2 15-minute pickup drop-off spots, and one will still be available on the side street, just not the one on Harvard Street. So I thought that was helpful. Just some quick thoughts here. I think the strategy number one, the one that we've been most talking about, I think is great. I've done that march down Longwood in the morning and in the afternoon alongside all those medical workers. And the sidewalk is really small there too. There is simply not enough space for people to get to work. Those essential employees that are going to the hospitals right there, they need more space. They simply do. And I think in our commercial areas as well, where you expect that people might be going to pick up and pick up food. Not all of us have cars. Not all of us are able to get to where we want to go by hopping in a car and popping out of a car and then right back into it. Likewise, not all of us have big backyards or even small backyards or any backyard whatsoever. And we're going to need to walk down these streets to get to places where there's enough space for us to engage in this passive recreation that we keep talking about using social distance. And for all those reasons, I think it's a good idea on our most traveled areas, the ones that Todd, that you've identified. Maybe there'll be others that are identified as well. I think it's important to be able to provide that space, not to encourage people to just go out because they can, not for recreational purposes. I'm not at all at this point. I mean, maybe I could be convinced, but I'm not at all at this point supportive of the idea of shutting down streets just so there's more space for people to go out of their homes and spend time together. I think that does send the wrong message and might encourage the wrong kind of behavior. Frankly, I mean, maybe, after listening to the debate at the Transportation Board, I'll think differently about it, but that's just where I am right now. And then I don't think I got the attachment number 7 related to the parks. So I really can't speak to that one just yet. So maybe after I get a chance to see those diagrams and what that might look like, I'll have more thoughts on strategy number 2, which is around providing more space, I think, on jogging paths and areas like that in at least 5 of the identified parks here. So after I see that, I might have some more thoughts. But honestly, this is a good discussion for us to have right now. But I look forward to either watching live or watching the recording of the Transportation Board meeting so I can get some more thoughts from the people like yourself, our Transportation Administrator, Mr. Corain, that think about this stuff every day.
Okay, any other comments? I think we ought to put off all 3 strategies until we hear what the outcome of the Transportation Board hearing is. And this is a horrible time to do anything to encourage people to get out. This is the absolute worst time. But is Dr. Jett on the meeting?
I believe he is, but while we try to reach him, I would say that if the board is serious about strategy number one, my inclination is do it sooner than later. If we wait for T-Board, it's another week. I believe my understanding, Todd, is that the Transportation Board, if the board gave them sufficient direction on one of these strategies, they might adopt it, but they didn't want to adopt, for example, 2 and 3, probably based on what I'm hearing. without coming back to the board. But would they be willing to adopt number one if the board gave them sufficient direction and support?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the transportation board standpoint on this is that, the stuff that we're doing is not necessarily related to long-term transportation planning. It's more of in a response to trying to alter our public way to meet the temporary demands of that COVID-19 is putting on our infrastructure. And because of that, they are, looking for guidance from the select board. And they thought that the meeting tomorrow would be an opportunity for them to listen to the public, listen to the research that we had found over the past week, and then make a recommendation to the select board and allow the select board to have the final call on this, on 1, 2, or 3, or all 3, based on the input you get from me, which is through a transportation planning lens, and through the input you would get from Dr. Jett, which is a public health lens, and the police, which is a public safety lens, et cetera. And to allow you to make the final decision on what to pursue. I think it'd be, it might be a different conversation tomorrow if the select board gives them the guidance that you want to move ahead with strategy 1, and you want their recommendation on 2 and 3. Then they would probably get into the details of 1 and say, okay, transportation staff, under your authority to enact a 60-day regulation, go and do this action based on support of the select board and our board. But I think any big decision like to be the final say, they're going to look for the select board to do that.
Okay, so strategy number 1 is more than just Coolidge Corner.
So if you wanted to get into the details of strategy number 1, in terms of the staff view, what we looked at were the main commuting corridors that we know about. Harvard Street, Beacon Street within Coolidge Corner, as well as a request to activate the bridle path. Then Longwood Avenue, which provides a large number of direct essential employees to and from the Longwood Medical area. And then Brookline Avenue, which also provides a large number of direct employee access to the Longwood Medical area. So those are the streets that we had come up with for strategy number 1. There might be other streets that other people identify at tomorrow's meeting or a week from now that we can take a look at. But those are ones that staff, based on what we observed in other communities and through webinars, identified as the key ones that we should be focusing on.
So Brookline Avenue and Longwood Avenue are also the routes that ambulances take to get to Longwood Medical Center. Prior to this crisis, employees riding their bicycles, use those routes seemingly with no problem. Why is there such a need now to?
That's actually not true. What we've had a lot of that they use it with no problem. So we have both the Pedestrian Advisory Committee released a Longwood Avenue report where they identified several deficiencies for pedestrian access, including the narrow sidewalk. And the the Bicycle Advisory Committee has identified Longwood Avenue as a direct connection for bikes that have insufficient bicycle accommodations because we're requiring any westbound to operate with the traffic in a shared lane. However, with respect to the emergency vehicle access, we are not restricting either the westbound or the eastbound travel lanes in this plan. Those remain. All that we are restricting is access to the parking lane. So the emergency vehicle access, both eastbound and westbound on Longwood Avenue, does not change from existing conditions today.
I will also point out that the intersection of Kent Street and Longwood has had 2 pedestrian injuries in the past, I think, 6 months,
Yes.
maybe a year, which is very high. And I think a signifier that there are a lot of conflicts on this route.
What's the length of the meters along Longwood Avenue? Are those 2-hour meters or are they extended longer term meters?
There's no parking meters on Longwood Avenue. It's all under the 2-hour residential rule. there were a couple parking meters up by Harvard Street, which were removed probably about 10 years ago to accommodate the left turn lane into Trader Joe's when the accident occurred, or after the accident occurred.
I will say there are a lot of placards for the U.S. Postal Service employees, but that's towards the Harvard end of Longwood.
Placards, what's that?
For employees, because they don't really have.
You mean reserve parking?
Mm-hmm.
It's not necessarily reserve parking. They make placards identifying their vehicles as U.S. Postal employees to identify them to the enforcement officers.
So that they don't get a ticket for longer than 2-hour parking, but they could easily be accommodated along Beacon Street.
I do think if number one in particular, I think there's still some questions about strategies 2 and 3, but number one in particular to Mel's point earlier, I think so that we don't need to have a special meeting, because I do think it would be unwise to wait until next Tuesday to put this into place. If we agree that we should do it, that we maybe vote on number 1 tonight, and then hear from the transportation board before voting on items 2 and 3.
Any other comments?
As I said before, I would want to know that we had some at least guidance in opening the streets to making sure that people do practice as much safe recommendations as they can, masks, that they stay 6 feet apart, etc. Even if you're on a bicycle, you could be sneezing and whatever. And we know that at least today or yesterday, I read in the Globe that they're estimating that approximately 50% of people who have COVID exhibit no symptoms. So people don't know they're sick, and they're passing it on to others who then become pretty ill. So we want to be really, really careful about this, I think. And, I would prefer to wait until we had the transportation board and we heard from the police department and we heard from the Advisory Council on Public Health in a more specific way. I would really prefer that. I think it's, I would even agree to having a special meeting on Thursday or Friday or some other time to deal with this. I just don't think we have. I would like to see the wording of the plan and understand that certain conditions are being met, that this is not something that people can use for recreational biking, for instance. And that has to be done on streets where there's very little traffic, and there are plenty of those around now. So I'm uncomfortable adopting it without some more specifics.
Yeah, I'd like to hear from Dr. Jett, but I first want to say that we got this today, at least I did, and to say that we must rush to pass something that we haven't had a chance to really read thoroughly and digest. Given that this is a critical time in our attempts to control this virus, I just don't see why we have to act today on something that we haven't fully digested ourselves and fully gotten information from the public, through this transportation board meeting, et cetera. I mean, what is the rush, and why do it at this particular time when we are urging everyone to stay in as much as possible, because we're about to enter a very deadly period, spiking in cases and spiking in deaths? I just don't see why we need to do that. Mrs. Jett, Dr. Jett, do you have anything to add or different viewpoint?
Yeah, so the Advisory Council met last night, and we followed the email traffic, and a lot of people chimed in from town meeting, various committees. And so I've just finished the draft of the letter that we're going to send to the Transportation Board. I think it's paramount that we consider the science in making this type of decision. As Select Board Heller mentioned, Boston Globe reported 50% may be asymptomatic. So I have a report from MMWR that was just released from Singapore that at least 20% might be asymptomatic. But that was in the cases that they actually did a test on, or they actually became positive, not asymptomatic. So we don't know. The science is still new. I have changed the guidance from when a person is exposed to someone that has COVID, we go back now 48 hours prior to onset of symptoms as a precautionary measure to quarantine everybody. But what that essentially is saying is that there are people on the street that I have observed over the last few weeks. There's 12 people on the street on any given block at any given time. There's 100 people in Trader Joe's any given time, 30 to 50 people in line. There are people on the sidewalks constantly every minute. And you have to begin to wonder, why are we here? And the reason is because people are not going out for just essential items. They're going out beyond that. To me, and the Advisory Council agrees, we should be having a conversation centered around expanding any type of public way at this point, because there shouldn't be anybody on the street. We have the ability to order our groceries online. We have the ability to order medicine online. The only rationale for anybody being out is because they're essential and they have to work. It is paramount that over the next month or so, that everybody stays in the home. Because what that does is that allows 2 cycles of the disease to transmit within a household and not expand no further outside the household. And this was a method that China used in terms of suppression. They figured if everybody was isolated and quarantined, the disease would transmit within a household. And I have seen that in the cases in Brookline, in another community. But the more people move about around in the community, whether it be running, whether it be walking, or breath of fresh air, etc., we will be dealing with this all the way until the summertime. And there will be no summer. And school will start later than August, September. We might be into October. So it's time for us to really begin to take this a little bit more serious and people really stay at home, even though it's painstaking. And I do understand, but I think this is a wrong move and it will be counterproductive. Thank you.
Bernard, you're
Thank you, Devin. And thank you, Dr. Jett. Any other comments or thoughts?
I just want to say, I do think we've got to choose one direction or the other. If we don't want people even to go out for passive recreation, then we need to shut down access to all the parks in Brookline. I'm not saying we should do that. In fact, I don't know that we should. If we don't want people to go out to go pick up food at our restaurants, then we should make our restaurants delivery only and not allow for takeout. I'm not saying that we should do that. In fact, I don't know that we should. I think we've got to figure out what our direction is here. Are we shutting this all down? Are we going hard and saying truly stay inside your homes? Or are we adopting a different approach, which we've been on, which does account for people to go get food and take out, to go to parks if they need to just go out and get some, what is our actual approach here? It seems like at one moment we're saying one thing and the other we're saying something differently. And I think people are getting confused. I certainly am.
I would like to build off of that as well. I think there are 2 important reasons to do it this week as opposed to doing it next week. One, I live on Longwood and I see that it is difficult to maintain that social distance for people who are walking these corridors. So I think that it is imperative to allow for more space for people. The expectation that somehow we're going to get it across to everyone that they need to basically shelter in place and don't come out until the government tells you it's okay. We've passed that point. We either do what Raoul said, which is to tell everybody stay home. Otherwise, we will send you back to your home if you don't have a good enough reason to be out of your house. Or we do what we've been doing, which is to allow for a free society to make their own choices with guidance from professionals and government saying this is very serious and you need to take it seriously. The other reason I think that we should do it this week as opposed to next week is because there's going to be a trial period. We're going to learn some things and we'll need to make tweaks. And the sooner that we have the ability to do that, I think the better the end product will be.
Any other? Yes, Nancy.
So, you know, as much as I would like to be going out and taking walks and getting my dog exercise, it's dangerous. And I agree with Dr. Jett that the science says, and the countries where they've conquered this thing the most successfully are the countries where they've gotten everybody to stay inside. So I think we should move to that model, at least for the next 3 weeks, when we're expecting this spike in cases and deaths. And, you know, hopefully to choke the virus off. That's what we want to do. And as painful as that is, I mean, you know, people can get everything delivered. You know, I've had that experience of getting takeout delivered, getting pharmacy deliveries, getting, you know, groceries delivered. It is possible. And it's not pleasant. And, you know, I won't recommend it for my life, but you know, to allow people to behave in ways that endanger others is what is a serious problem. We don't allow people to drive without licenses because they might, you know, they might endanger others in their car. We don't allow cars that are not inspected to be on the road because they're going to. We're not completely a free society. We have to recognize that there are times when we need to do things that are for the good of everyone. And I hope this is one of those times.
So just as a matter of fact, it is nearly impossible to get groceries delivered at this point. I have investigated it for several weeks in a row, and there are no available delivery spots. So I agree, it would be ideal if everybody could shelter in place and have their prescriptions and their food and anything else that they need delivered to them. But that there just isn't the capacity right now. And hopefully there will be in the near future. But people who lack an automobile do need to go out on foot to get some things, and there's no way around that.
Yeah.
Well, I think a lot of the people who are going out, first of all, I agree it's difficult to get a delivery now. And I had to wait 5 days for my last delivery. And so it does require advanced planning. But you know, it's what are we talking about here? We're talking about serious consequences. You know, I think Dr. Jett said it well.
Well, then we should be voting on a stay-at-home order.
Fine,
that is enforceable.
So
I'm not there.
Here.
I am not there.
Okay, but it's not a binary choice. I mean, it's not, you know, shut everything down or open everything up. I think, you know, my thinking is that, you know, what we have now seems to be working to some degree. We don't want to put out the message that people should take advantage of additional opportunities to be out in the street. Not saying that people should not, you know, go to the grocery store, et cetera, but let's not give the message that it's party time now. It's going to hit 70 degrees soon. And if people, you know, are thinking that we have a great opportunity to get out in the streets, there's going to be, you know, a huge influx of people to the streets.
Well, I think that the way that it was characterized was a binary choice, this conversation. And I also think that by only passing recommendation number 1 and not 2 and 3, because I agree that 2 and 3 could have those unintended consequences that induces demand and then perpetuates this virus to spread. But for recommendation number 1, there are a whole lot of people that need to get to the places using those corridors. And right now, it is not that safe to do so.
Mr. Chair, could I speak up?
Sure.
So I, following the conversations about the so-called binary choice, and I don't believe the town has that ability. So, we're one of 351 cities and towns in this Commonwealth, and the governor has, and the Commonwealth of Massachusetts have the legal right to pass laws or not pass laws or orders in the case of this emergency, and that we're supposed to abide by them. I think it would be not appropriate for our city or town, one individual city or town, to do some sort of a stay-at-home order. First of all, how can you justify it when your neighboring communities don't have that, and we don't have a sort of statewide system of communication and enforcement. So I don't believe that we have or should do stay-at-home orders. And so even though I believe there's a lot of people out there that shouldn't be, they're out there, and I think we have to moderate it and control it, and that's why I think strategy 1 is appropriate to do at this time.
Well, I think if that's the proposal, then strategy 1 should emphasize that the expansion of the sidewalks and the places for bicycles is for limited purposes of essential services only. And I think that message has to be clear in the order, or in the opening of the streets, because, and then I think we need to have some enforcement. And I know that that's difficult. I'm not, I don't want to punish anybody, but I do think we need to make it clear to people that, their behavior of congregating in the streets or whatever is endangering others and maybe themselves as well. So it's a public health emergency. It's a serious issue.
Any other thoughts?
Only that at this point, I wouldn't be supportive of, I don't know what Select Board Member Heller means by enforcement, but I certainly wouldn't be supportive of police stopping people on the street to ask them where they're going, or to ask them to move along when they might be stopped for a very good reason. I wouldn't support that element of it.
But you would support messaging that makes it clear that this is not a summertime party decision on the select board.
Or a recreational, it's not an opportunity for recreation.
Yeah.
I would certainly support that. Yes, I would support that. I will just say, just we say that it's not an opportunity for recreation, but our parks are still open for passive recreation. So again, the inconsistency in messaging here, I would support the need that if you feel that it is essential for you to be outside for any of the number of reasons that we've enumerated in the past and will continue to enumerate pretty much every time we have a meeting, then this is a way that you can take that walk down these very few stretches that have been identified where because of density, there's more folks there, and including in the Longwood area where there's a lot of medical professionals that take that walk down there. There's the appropriate amount of space, not even ample space, but the appropriate amount of space to socially distance while you're heading down that corridor. And again, there's only 3 corridors in the entire town that have been identified at this point, I think.
Okay, so I think the consensus of the board is that we are not going to go with 2 or 3. We're not going to recommend 2 or 3. Would the board like to vote on whether we recommend to the transportation board? Is that what we're doing, Mr. Kleckner? Recommending to the transportation board.
That's what I would suggest. Okay. Yes.
So vote to recommend to the transportation board strategy number 1.
Can we just clarify that? Because I believe that it was the transportation board was going to be making recommendations to the board, to the select board. I don't know if Mr.
Well, I
Crane.
think we're not giving a recommendation so much as just indicating our inclination. And you know, they'll take that into consideration in their.
My understanding, Member Fernandez, is that the Transportation Board is reluctant to take any decisions without select board input. But if you give them input on number one, my guess is that they will take the comments tomorrow night and vote to implement it. But I'd like Todd to confirm that.
And it's under their authority to do that then?
They can do that. Yes.
Okay. Okay.
So yeah, they do have the authority to do that under their enabling legislation. They convened the meeting at the request of yourselves and the town administrator to review everything, and what they thought they were doing was offering a recommendation to the select board to decide. So tomorrow I could explain that, in fact, the select board is making a recommendation or giving guidance to them, and that under their authority, you would like them to act on strategy number one and provide feedback or a recommendation on strategies number 2 and 3.
Okay.
Okay, why don't we do this? I'd like to have a vote on whether to approve strategies number 2 and 3 to give the Transportation Board some direction as to the board's thinking. So I guess I'll phrase it in terms of I move that we state to the Transportation Board that the Select Board does not approve strategies 2 and 3. But we would like to receive back from them any feedback from their hearing. Is that a fair way of putting it?
Either at this time or without a clear recommendation from the Transportation Board on 2 and 3.
Okay, so the Select Board does not. How would you phrase that, Ms. Hamilton?
Well, maybe we should just focus on number 1 and leave 2 and 3 alone.
Well, I think we need to be clear that, you know, we are not comfortable at this point with 2 and 3.
I agree. Why should they waste their time if we're not going to agree with it?
Well, I would like to hear what the public has to say, not remove it altogether.
Well, okay, so we do not agree at this time, but are willing to listen to any comments from the public as transmitted by the Transportation Board.
I think that's a fair way to put it. We're inclined to see recommendation 1 implemented at this time if the Transportation Board concurs and want to await further process and feedback around numbers 2 and 3.
Okay, so I want to put those into 2 different motions. First, I move approval of the statement that the Select Board does not agree at this time with strategies 2 and 3, but urges the Transportation Board to convey to the Select Board their thoughts and the thoughts of the public after their hearing on Tuesday, April 8th.
Wednesday.
All in favor? Pardon me?
Wednesday, April 8th.
I'm sorry, Wednesday, April 8th. Right. All in favor, Mr. Franco?
Aye.
Ms. Heller?
Aye.
Ms. Hamilton?
Aye.
Mr. Fernandez?
Aye.
And chair votes aye. Next, I move that we indicate to the Transportation Board that the Select Board is favorable to strategy number 1, but urges the implementation implementation of strategy number one, accompanied by a clear messaging that this is intended to provide opportunities for essential transportation and other activities in the expanded spaces within the town. That clear? That makes sense?
Makes sense.
Okay. Okay. All in favor? Mr. Franco?
Aye.
Ms. Heller?
No.
Ms. Hamilton?
Aye.
Mr. Fernandez?
Aye.
And chair votes no. So it passes 3-2, and I will convey that to the Transportation Board for their meeting tomorrow. Any other discussion of that? Okay, moving on. Discussion of possible additional mitigation measures for essential businesses. This is a discussion that is intended to address not just construction, but also other essential businesses like the food business, grocery stores, but also pharmacies. There's a lot of talk in the community about problems on construction sites, but our biggest problem, our greatest threat, is in the grocery stores. I'd like to, make sure that we're thinking of both of these as we think of any potential additional mitigation measures to be proposed by the Select Board. Mr. Kleckner, you have presentations by the Building Commissioner and Dr. Jett.
Yes, so we are prepared to give you an update on both those essential services, construction, as well as food service, grocery stores in particular. But let me just kind of create some context, and then obviously let those staff members make a presentation, and then we have others, including town council, here to answer questions. But let me first talk about construction. So we just had this discussion about sort of making choices as individual cities and towns and the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And, I believe that the governor has made that choice for every city and town that makes a determination that construction activity to some extent, and Dan Bennett, our building commissioner, will clarify that, is an essential activity, whether we like that or not. And I think I mentioned a couple weeks ago that there were probably many aspects of the governor's order that some people agree with and other people don't. The fact of the matter is that the state governor needs to control activity across cities and towns to make it effective and enforceable. And he's determined that much construction activity in the Commonwealth is essential. Now, he does give cities and towns the discretion to make sure that those job sites are safe. But I see that as more of an individual review of each individual job site as opposed to a blanket statement that construction is not safe in general and we're going to ban it, because in my opinion, that contravenes the order of the governor. Now on food service is also another essential activity, and the governor has also given guidelines about how to make that safe. And I know we've spent a great deal of time on that. Mr. Chair, you're right. This is where I get most nervous about social gathering, is in grocery stores, which of course is essential. And as Select Board Member Franco said, you couldn't get delivery even if you wanted to. So that's something that a lot of people don't have choices about. So we've spent most of our effort on food service, and I think we have a good guidance for stores that has just been put into place. And I can ask Dr. Jett or his retired and now back helping us Inspector Pat Maloney, who can talk about that. And Dan Bennett is available to talk about construction. So whichever order you want to go in, Mr. Chair, feel free to call on one of those two.
Why don't we start off with the food advisory that was issued recently? I think the construction piece may be a little more longer discussion.
So I would call on Dr. Jett or Pat Maloney for that.
Yeah, is Pat Maloney on the line? Okay, Dr. Jett, maybe you can fill us in. This is the food advisory that was issued by the health department, giving guidance to grocery stores and other facilities or other establishments with respect to how to conduct their business in a way that minimizes the risk to the public of transmission of the virus.
Thank you, Chair. So about a month ago, I actually had a conversation with Pat that I was leery. You have to excuse me. I had a tooth taken out, so I'm still trying to recover today.
You didn't close down all the dentists?
Yeah, it was an emergency because I broke a tooth in half.
I know.
So I've been walking around with this for 2 weeks, and I finally did something when I had time today.
Yeah.
So approximately a month ago, I became leery that there was not enough protection if we went to closing non-essential services. So my thought behind this was everybody was going to rush to the grocery stores, to every other business, and they were going to expose the town if we left business open, but also the grocery stores or any places where people would convene. And so I initially wanted to provide or to make it mandatory for every employer to have face masks, gloves, etc. But my dear colleague, Pat Maloney, backed me off of that suggestion because he thought that there wouldn't be enough supply. Now, I think it's time to move in that direction. So what I'm noticing, and I don't really talk about this a lot public, we are starting to see people that provide essential services test positive, which means that if we have people at Trader Joe's or Star Market and they are asymptomatic, not only are we exposing them to people that have COVID, but now they are carriers. And if we don't slow this down to some extent, what you can expect to see is that there will not be enough employees for some of these essential services to be open. And so I asked Pat to craft the language to require not only food establishments, but I think we need to move in the next direction is to require everybody to enter these essential places to wear some type of face covering and goggles or glasses to protect the workers, but also to protect everybody else in the stores. So this week alone, but since last week, there's been several workers at different food markets that have tested positive, not only in Brookline, but outside of Brookline. And keep in mind that how we do our testing, the only people that are now really getting tested have to have severe symptoms. So our numbers may appear low because people that are symptomatic, that have mild symptoms, will not get tested. So I think one phase is all the employers need to ensure their employees have masks, have gloves. The second phase is everybody that visits these places need to have masks. And I think the establishments need to move in that direction. If we're going to remain open, I slowly see that we're going to have to make some adjustments so that the business can remain open and to protect the greater community.
Okay, so we have the advisory, and you go out and inspect various establishments. Have you been finding compliance? Well, the advisory is not in effect yet, right?
Yeah, so it went into effect this morning. So I'll be making visits to the various places, and I personally made visits to the different grocery stores, places that have been open or are open. and made recommendations. Some of them, my dear colleague Pat Maloney has been with me, but I've made recommendations including signage, social distancing. Some of the places I have visited 2 or 3 times to reiterate that. It is a challenge. I understand that, grocery stores are bagged up. People cannot do a lot of ordering online because I have received emails. But, while we see this exist, if we don't step up our efforts to protect the community, we're seeing 100 people in the store and 30 or 40 people outside all times of the day. Even when we have special times for elders to go early in the morning at some of these places, there is a line. And I have received complaints from the community discussing the feasibility of the social distancing and how to properly enforce it, which is difficult to enforce it because grocery stores and some of these places of business are essential.
Do you have sufficient staff to do the inspections? Or is that an issue that we need to address also?
Well, I think as right now, we don't have a lot of cases as of today. So we can visit some of the places tomorrow and ensure that it's enforcement. And, we will follow up. Prior to putting this in place, we did talk to every grocery store, at least the big ones, and discuss the requirement that was going to come out. And so everybody seemed to be on board with that. But as I began to go investigate some of them yesterday, they said they had the items in the business, but they actually hadn't distributed it. So, I'm just trying to make changes that I think will protect these businesses to be open for the long term. But, as I have seen already in certain departments, but also certain businesses, if everybody gets sick for 14 days or we isolate them in quarantine, you might be knocking out essential business if we don't move to this direction.
Any comments from the select board? I guess, my only comment would be that this is an area where we need to be aggressively monitoring and enforcing to the extent that we can enforce. I've been in a couple of grocery stores. I'm not going to mention the names. I was shocked at how lackadaisical was their efforts to make their establishments safe, both for their customers as well as their employees. I hope we, with this new advisory, really make clear to people how serious this is and how seriously we're taking their obligations to operate in a safe way.
Could I ask a question? Maybe it's both to Dr. Jett and to Mr. Kleckner, but is there a way to encourage the grocery stores to open up more delivery services? Can you hear me?
Yeah, yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay.
Select Board Heller.
Okay.
That is a suggestion that we're going to discuss with them to see how feasible it is. And, I want everybody to keep in mind some of my suggestions or thoughts on how we need to deal with what's happening in the world is I'm paying attention to the news as to what is happening in New York. And my friend and colleague in New York didn't put enough progressive measures in place fast enough. They talked a lot about allowing people to continue to walk around and show up at different venues, celebrating different holidays, visiting restaurants, taking the tea in different modes of transportation. And you can Google my friends now, and a lot of people are requesting that they resign because it expedited and exacerbated the amount of deaths that they now experience in New York. So, unfortunately, once the numbers start to creep up, if you don't take progressive action, it tends to get out of hand before you have enough time to respond.
I'll just say I read the order carefully, and everything in it looks totally sensible. We will, on Thursday's virtual town hall for small businesses and nonprofits, reiterate this order, and I'm calling it order, not guidance, because it is, that folks need to comply with. And also, we'll see if there's any feedback from small business owners and any support they need in complying with this, and I'll make sure to share that.
Thank you.
This is Pat. I just want to add what we're doing to get the word out. It's this notice is also going, it went out today to email to all of our establishments. We're also using the MRC to hand deliver this notice. We're going to put that together tomorrow so that they actually will be receiving it from a person representing the department through the MRC. I also want to note that if you see the second part of it, we are stressing issues. We've had a few issues of people questioning delivery service and how it gets delivered to the person's home. So we tighten that up a bit also. And lastly, we've added, and I'm not aware of other towns doing this, where we've asked the operators to step up their screening of their staff. As Dr. Jett said, we've been getting more notifications of staff becoming ill. So we need to step that up a bit, where not only are they going to have protective wear on them, but they're also going to be screened coming to work, and temperatures will be taken. So that's another level up that we're not seeing in other communities, but I think it's a smart practice to make sure we're not only protecting the customers, but the staff there, because they're on the front line in those cash registers and seeing a lot of people.
Great. Any other comments? There's nothing for us to vote on. I just wanted to have the discussion so that people are aware of what we are doing in order to ensure safety in this area of business. And like I said, especially the grocery stores are scary. And in my experience, they need to be given a real kick in the rear to get them to take this seriously. Let's move on to the construction issue. Mr. Bennett, are you there? Ben Bennett?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. I'd like to sort of have you update us on efforts you're taking to ensure that construction projects adhere to the social distancing and other safety measures that particularly are listed in the guidance document that was put out by the governor, which I think is fairly thorough, as well as what specific guidelines or procedures are being used at different construction sites here in Brookline. I'm aware of fairly detailed guidelines and procedures being used at Hancock Village and also at the 2 Life project on Harvard Street, but I'm sure there are others. You can give us some overview of that.
Sure. So just a little bit of background. On the 31st, the governor revised his order with respect to construction. Initially it was construction with no limitation. On the 31st, he narrowed that decision, or that the definition of essential services for construction activities. And that came as a little bit of a surprise to most people in the construction industry. I had received it, and I immediately reached out to my state inspector, as well as other colleagues in the area, because it was not something that we had anticipated coming through that fast. Initially, the construction without limitation was pretty much black and white, and he put this order out, of the revised order, and it was allowed for a lot of gray area. And that's happening right now, unfortunately, in many communities on how they're interpreting this. So I've sat down with town council and some of my other colleagues in Newton Natick, Framingham, and tried to come to some sort of a consensus on how we're going to, proceed. So most of the revised order addresses housing production. So if it's got new housing, or if it's a mixed use that has housing, if it's a public school, a university, or a college, that's allowed. So stepping back and looking at what is permitted at this point and what is not permitted, I'm trying to draw that line and be as consistent as I can. So the Hancock Village, 134 Babcock Street, 370 Harvard, 1080 Beacon Street, 61 Park Street. These are all residential projects. The 61 Park Street is something that does not produce any housing. It's a renovation of an existing building. So in my view, that would be something that would not be able to proceed and would have to, shut down. The others that I mentioned are the 40B projects that we have, and those are permitted to move forward under the governor's new order. In addition, any project that's all commercial would have to shut down. So the Audi on Boylston Street, that renovation is something that would not be able to continue. 700 Brookline Ave, the 11-story hotel. There was a question as to whether or not that is something that the governor would have wanted, because he talks about hotels and Airbnbs having the availability, if they're open, to have rooms for first responders and people in the medical field. 700 Brookline Ave isn't going to be ready for any type of certificate of occupancy until sometime in August. So I felt that was something that was not would not fall under the revised order, and they would be another location that would have to shut down. There's a daycare center on Harvard Street that does not fall under the order. So there's a little bit of a line that I'm drawing out there. We're notifying those contractors and those job sites this week to try to get them closed and secured as safe as possible. They'll be notifying the inspectors. We'll go out, we'll do a walkthrough with them, and at some point in time down the line, if they choose to reopen, they would have to meet certain criteria, and the governor's order would have to be revised. With respect to the projects and how we're managing these safety plans and the social distancing, as I had said last week, we had taken originally it was more of a reactive type of thing. If we got a complaint, we went out there, and last week, and maybe a little bit before the meeting, we took a proactive approach, and I've asked all my inspectors to visit, any of their sites in their areas, in their districts, with unannounced, stop by, talk with the workers, look at their health and safety plans, and try to work with them to let them know, what we're doing, what's safe, what's not safe, and how to, proceed under the governor's guidelines. Hancock Village, I haven't gotten any complaints probably in the last week or so with respect to the social distancing. There was a point in time where I was getting a couple of photos a day, and they worked together with us to come up with a couple of new policies. They've really posted the site. That it's very visible out there about social distancing. My guys are out there 3 times a day still talking, getting out of the cars and talking with these contractors and letting them know the importance of this. And in our discussion, we've said, the most important thing here, if someone's driving down the street and sees them, closer than 6 feet together, that just doesn't look good. So we told them, one of the easiest things you can do is comply with that social distancing guideline. So at this point, we are out there doing that. My inspectors have indicated to me that, the residents and some of the projects that they've done inspections on, they're grateful that we're still out there and working. And at the same time, we're responding if we get a complaint, which we haven't got as many as we had, probably 3 weeks ago. So I think it's working, or, the inspectors are out there talking with these individuals. At this point, I think, we're doing the best job we can trying to keep things in order. In addition, I did come up with an email that I sent out to roughly 3,000 email addresses that we got out of our Acela database, and it informed them of the governor's revised order. It attached a lot of the guidelines and documentation that we're looking for. We are getting the safety plans emailed to us. We're having them post them out there or keep them on site if my guys do go out there, either unannounced or on a complaint. I want them to hand that plan to them so they can see it and review it and talk with the contractor. So at this point, we are moving forward. I was about a week late on implementing this plan because I wanted to make sure that I was on the consistent with what the governor wanted, and talk to some of my other colleagues on what jobs they were considering essential and what jobs they were considering non-essential. And then that is still debatable, and you could probably go to several communities, and unfortunately you could get some differing opinions out there. But at this point, I'm moving forward, as I explained, with mostly anything that's producing housing. They'll be able to move forward, and we'll be shutting down those commercial sites, and we'll be talking with them this week on that.
Great, thank you. Any comments or questions from the board?
Sure.
I said any comments or questions
yes.
from the board?
Yes. Sometimes I just want to see what other people have to say. I did want to ask Mr. Bennett, what do you make of, there's at least 2 unions now that represent construction workers, the Mass Building Trades Council, 75,000 member organization that has been calling upon the governor to halt all construction, and then the Regional Council of Carpenters, a 13,000 person organization that has actually ordered their workers to not show up to construction, and both are saying that it's simply, in under any conditions, it's simply not safe to continue to do this work. What do you make of that?
So I have seen those documents, and I understand their concerns, and I think as these memberships, whether they're a union or a trade group, obviously I think, and in the construction sites that are going on in Brookline, what most of these contractors are telling me is if the employee or the worker feels unsafe, they don't have to show up. And so that's a voluntary thing. Now, I don't know what happens with them with respect to pay, or, if they get assigned to another project, but so no one's making, these individuals show up. But with respect to the union and the trade groups, if they have put that out there, and I think by these outside influences, what you're going to find is some of these projects are more likely than not just going to have to shut down because of the fact that these members, either from the trade group or the union, just aren't going to show up for work. And you can look at the high school project to see a little bit of that. There are the unions have decided not to show up to some of those projects, and you'll see that just on their own, these will either slow down, or the employees will just not show up, and they'll either shut down, or what I'm finding at the high school, probably today there was maybe at most 15 or 20 workers there, and that's much smaller than what has been there in the past. But I think just as this whole emergency moves forward, and these notices go out, and their leaders tell them not to show up, that without us taking any action by us, meaning the governor or the town of Brookline, I think on their own, these projects will slow down and probably come to a stop.
I'd like to add on the high school project.
Yes, go ahead.
I'd like to add about the high school project that the other thing that's slowing these construction projects down is the lack of supplies. We have been notified in the high school by both companies in Vermont and Quebec that they are not able to supply the kind of steel and other materials that we need. And if there's no material, there's nothing to work with, there can be no construction. So that's the other factor, I think, that is slowing down the situation in many construction projects. The other thing I would like to say is that I think it's probably nearly impossible to maintain social distancing when you're working inside someplace. And, you know, depending obviously on the size and how many people are there, but I think that is probably a more urgent situation than people who are working outside and can separate themselves more easily, especially on a big site like the high school. So I just wanted to add that thought.
Yeah. Of course, it depends on what type of work the person is doing. And, you know, Mr. Bennett, if we find that, let's say well, don't do renovations, but if we find that on a project, because of the type of work being done, workers are forced to be too close to each other for purposes of social distancing, do we have the ability to at least temporarily shut that part of the project down?
Well, if the work requires them to be closer than the social distancing allows, or if it's in a confined space, in those guidelines, it does direct them to take the proper precautions by wearing masks and face masks, gloves, and to take the precaution required to be closer than that 6 feet. And that's in the state guidelines, and it's in the town of Brookline guidelines. I just adopted, for the most part, the state guidelines. So it's addressed in those guidelines.
And is it possible in those situations for them to, have, sufficient so-called PPEs to make it safe? I mean, I assume that what you're talking about is face covering, as well as masks and goggles.
That's correct. I haven't heard of any of the some of our larger projects. I have not heard of them having trouble with their own supplies and their own protective gear. So I think, yes, it is possible for them to comply with that.
Any other questions, discussion?
So I just want to go back to something that Mr. Bennett said earlier in his comments about the lack of clarity in his consultation with his colleagues in neighboring communities. I think everybody knows that Boston and Cambridge have taken a different interpretation of this of the governor's order, and I'm wondering if you've had conversations with either officials in either of those communities to find out why they are not allowing construction to proceed.
I've not had any contact with Cambridge or Boston. I've talked to a couple of contractors that work in these neighboring communities. Boston is just it's a hard line, and the mayor has stood by it. Cambridge did a similar thing. They've shut down, but they've put a committee together to look at allowing some exceptions. I have not heard of anything that's been approved by the city of Cambridge, but I know there's a committee that the mayor put together, and I think a contractor could meet with them and try to let them know that they feel that they should be exempt from whatever construction laws they have in place. And just on another note, the governor's order, the revised, if you go down through that list, at the bottom there is a you can click on the link, and it would get you to a place that you could apply for an exception or to get your project to be considered essential and continue to work. I have gone onto that link myself. Unfortunately, it hasn't been updated to include the revised list of essential services, so that could be a little confusing for anyone trying to get in there. And I have not heard of any. I've actually emailed that twice and asked if they could at least update the link so that the people could see the revised essential services list when they're applying. But that hasn't been done. I checked that early this morning, and I've not heard back from anybody from that email address either.
And you haven't heard any chatter from your contacts at the state level about further clarification coming to reconcile the hard line that Boston's taking and what Brookline and other communities are taking to sort of come up with a consolidated, this is what we mean.
I have not, and it's there's a lot of actually unfortunately mixed messages out there when I try to reach out to my contacts at the BBRS, which oversees the building code and the adoption and provides guidance to us. And they have not provided much guidance to us in this event, unfortunately. And they were very unaware. They were caught. What I'm being told is they were caught off guard by this second amended order by the governor. And my email to the my state inspector that night that I had found out about it got me the next morning and was a bit surprised. And he reached out and tried to make some contacts, and there was still not much clarity other than me trying to be consistent with, at a minimum, try to follow a little bit of what Newton is doing so that at least in our own area, I know we got Boston and Cambridge on our other side that we're not following there. But they predate, I think, the governor's original order, and that's where I think they feel that they can do what they're doing.
I just want to sort of talk more about, I feel like we've been talking a lot about consistency in this meeting on a number of different issues and just some consistency here. One of the things so we, some weeks ago, issued this voluntary request for construction work to be shut down in Brookline. And ostensibly, that is because for a variety of reasons, we think it's either unsafe or inappropriate for that work to continue. And if everyone just complied with our request, then there would be no construction going on in Brookline. Likewise, the governor's order, the businesses that ended up on the non-essential side were there for a couple of reasons. One, because, well, they're just simply not essential, but otherwise because things like hair salons and nail salons and places like that, there's a high probability for contact in this work. I've been watching some construction work going on around town and just thinking about whether or not it's even realistic to ask people who work in construction to stay 6 feet apart from each other at all times. In fact, I imagine there's some parts of the work that require people to be closer together, including for safety reasons or just simply to accomplish the work. So what we're hearing from those folks that represent the working people on these sites is that they feel it's simply not safe, and presumably they understand the impact of this, the impact that these working people and their families will not be able to work during this time. And so I think I take seriously the statement by those organizations that this work shouldn't continue because they know as well as anybody else does the impact that this will have on those working people in particular. And I know Mr. Bennett was just the messenger on this, but this message from developers or whoever is overseeing construction about, well, if they feel it's unsafe, they just don't have to, just don't show up, right? Effectively, that's somebody, losing their own job because they either have two choices: either show up to a work site that they feel is not safe, or actually not having a job anymore. And again, not shooting the messenger, but if this is the message coming from people who oversee these work sites or from the developers themselves, I think that is very concerning. Add to this the fact that a lot of the workers that are doing work here in Brookline, I'd venture to say almost, the vast majority of them, if not all of them, don't actually live in Brookline, which means in order to come and do this work in Brookline, they may be coming from Boston, from communities like Chelsea, where we're seeing a dramatic rise in COVID cases, and many are probably taking the MBTA and traveling to Brookline to come and do this work. this puts themselves, their families, but also transit workers and others at greater risk in order to do what, frankly, is not necessarily essential work. It helps us move toward housing production goals and things like that, but could take some time off, I believe. In addition, it seems, it's as Mr. Franco pointed out, it's Boston, it's Cambridge, it's also Somerville that has put these orders into place, and then also I think Nantucket and the Vineyard were having conversations about this as well. Just yesterday in Governor Baker's press conference, he actually spoke pretty glowingly of Mayor Walsh in Boston. One of the things he said is, we fully support the initiatives and the policies that he is pursuing for the city of Boston. And if you're following any of this at all, you know that the real issue here has been, the guidance or the order from the governor and what's happening in Boston are two very different things. I think I was on board with the fact in previous meetings when we discussed this that we need to maintain consistency with the order from Governor Baker. It seems, though, Governor Baker has no problem with municipalities in deciding whether or not this work is safe to continue. He's certainly allowed it to continue unabated. The prohibition to go into place unabated in Boston, Cambridge, and Somerville. And if you look at a map, where that municipality jutting right into the city of Boston and just across from Cambridge, that's actually missing. And so we think about it being important to, at the very least, have a regional approach to this. We're part of what's missing in a regional approach. So, I'm certainly ready at this point. Obviously there's certain limited exceptions in terms of work that needs to continue, as there are limited exceptions in other ways. But I'm certainly ready at this point to call for a halt to all non-essential construction in Brookline. And I know that I think we won't be voting on this tonight, I think. But I'm, I haven't been there in the past just because of this issue of being consistent with the governor's order, although I thought it was a good idea to not have construction going. But at this point, it seems the governor has cleared the way for municipalities to decide for themselves whether or not they think this work is safe to do, by us having weeks ago requested voluntarily that this work stop. In terms of consistency, I'm thinking we were saying at that time we think this work shouldn't continue, and we're asking construction work to stop on its own. So I don't see why we wouldn't, at this point, put a halt to it if we do indeed have the power to do it, which I think we do.
Well, we have the power to do it, but we don't have the legal authority to do it.
Notwithstanding prior comments about that.
So I would be interested in hearing from our town council if she still has that opinion that we don't have the legal authority to do it. But in terms of consistency and just one point of, I think, clarification, but I could be wrong. Somerville didn't take the same stance that Cambridge and Boston did. They shut down certain construction activities, but by no means did they shut everything down. As far as other consistency, I personally am not at the point of shutting especially housing construction down, because I wouldn't want to take the choice of a worker who chooses to come to a job that they still have. I just personally don't want to make that choice for them. The other reason is we are very behind in our housing production goals. And yes, you could take a few months off, but those few months will add additional costs and put some badly needed capital A affordable housing projects in jeopardy, because there will just be a lot of unknowns. So I'm just not at that same place, but I welcome town council's legal opinion.
Hi, good evening. This is Jocelyn. So I completely understand the sentiments that have been expressed by Select Board Member Fernandez. I think Commissioner Bennett said it best. But the fact is that we are facing an executive order issued by the governor of the state where he has determined that the construction of housing is an essential service. I do believe that there is room within that order to identify particular projects that may not be meeting the recommendations of the advisory that was issued by the Department of Public Health back on March 24th. And I think we need to distinguish between, say, for example, I don't recall if it was Martha's Vineyard or Nantucket, where the Board of Health on one of the, whichever community it was, had determined that for reasons that were particular to those particular communities, that construction should be shut down. I also point out that the orders that were issued in Boston and Cambridge were issued before the governor issued his executive order with respect to construction back on March 23rd. And as the commissioner has pointed out, it was amended on March 31st. So I do think that if there are circumstances where the Director of Health and Human Services believes that construction for whatever reason should be shut down, I think certainly there's authority to do that. But otherwise, I do not believe that we should contravene the order of the governor that was issued most recently amended on March 31st. And there are penalties associated with that.
And legal liability.
That's right.
I guess, I think the question should not be, do we shut down construction, but rather, can we enforce the rules, the procedures with respect to distancing and safety measures in order to make the construction that's going on safe for the workers and the community. And from what I'm hearing from Mr. Bennett, we're doing a pretty good job on that. I'd contrast that with a situation with our food establishments where, the risk to me is much greater. Any other thoughts, comments?
I have been the board member that has signaled the willingness to have this conversation in previous weeks. I'm just generally confused, and I understand that Boston and Cambridge and others had an order that was in place pausing or limiting or forbidding construction activity prior to the governor's guidance. But I would think the governor's guidance would trump any local initiative taken up until his order came into effect. And it doesn't appear to me that there's been any conversation or message telegraphed to those communities that are restricting construction activities at this point to cut it out and come in line with what the guidance is statewide. I'm not an attorney. I read the governor's two orders, the initial one and then the revised one on the 31st. And it seems to me that he's pretty clear about the fact that this is statewide guidance. Local municipalities can make amendments and accommodations for health and safety, but construction activity for that results in housing creation is to be allowed. And again, I'm just confused as to why Boston and Cambridge are being treated differently than everybody else in the state.
I don't know, Select Board Member Franco. I don't know that they're being treated differently. I think they have chosen a different path. So I can't say that they're being treated differently. I mean, they've decided to step aside from the order issued by the governor, and that's simply a policy decision that they have chosen to make.
So why isn't the governor or the state saying you're not in line with the guidance and the order that we have issued statewide? That's that's not acceptable.
Well, this is Mel. My recollection is, in fact, the governor's general counsel did issue some sort of statement statewide and made it clear that they expected the governor's order to be upheld. And we don't know exactly what's going on between the state and Cambridge and Boston. I acknowledge that the governor or the mayor has said some things. But I do think that there is a distinction because those two communities did enact an order beforehand. And I think, as was stated, Cambridge has modified that and I think is allowing construction to resume at some point. But, you know, I think looking at the kind of construction that goes on in Boston, pretty significantly different than that takes place in Brookline and probably most other communities other than Springfield. And
yeah, I'd also ask that, you know, or add, sorry, I'd also add that, you know, what do you expect the governor to do? He's not going to send the state police after the mayor of Boston. And what's really going on here is that Boston and Cambridge have said, we'll take our risks or we'll take our chances with respect to liability from, you know, whoever, you know, could sue on whatever basis. But you know, I don't think that the fact that the governor has not, you know, sent the state police or someone after, you know, the mayor of Boston, it has anything to do with, or really, you know, tells us anything about, you know, whether Brookline should comply with or resist the governor's order. I think that's really a question of, you know, do we want to put ourselves in a position of liability, among other things, and do we want to, you know, in a certain sense, set a precedent for cities and towns to ignore other aspects of the governor's order that may be, you know, uncomfortable for them. So.
I would simply suggest that if we were to issue guidance saying no construction activity in Brookline, and I underscore the if, I do not think that that order would be overturned in the relative near future, given the pace of work in the court system. And if there was some sort of adverse finding, some liability on behalf of the town, I would not expect that there would be much of a penalty, if only because I think public sentiment would be on the side of the town and erring on the side of caution. But
fair enough. Any other thoughts? Suggestions? Where are we in this conversation? I appreciate the report from Mr. Bennett in terms of what the town is doing and the ability of the town to a significant degree ensure a level of safety at the construction sites. I think that's important information for us to have in terms of whatever decision we make. So.
Can I ask then if you know the voluntary request for construction to stop that happened a few weeks ago? Eagle-eyed viewers will remember that was something that came from town staff and that the board didn't vote on. So we didn't have a real thorough discussion of that request that went out. What is the thinking behind that request? Why did we ask construction to stop voluntarily?
Excuse me, Dan Bennett here. My recollection is that this was early in this emergency, the public emergency. We had received a lot of, I think the EOC received a lot of complaints from multifamily dwellings and buildings that were occupied, most of which had an elderly population, and there was concern with the fact that in these buildings, a condo owner or the building owner was making or doing renovation work or some other permitted type of activity that the residents felt that they didn't have control over who was and wasn't entering, you know, their building, and they had concerns with respect to that. So I think we had then put our heads together and said, all right, let's ask for some voluntary cooperation from some of the either the landlords, the owners, the condo associations, the management companies, and see if we could get them to voluntarily, stop work in these areas where the residents of their own buildings or the owners of the condo people were having, concerns. And I think we had attempted to try to address, that concern early on, but we didn't want to box in just occupied buildings. We had put the message out there that anyone, could stop, voluntarily. And, initially it did get some cooperation. I know Hancock Village or Chestnut Hill Realty, while they're doing their renovation work at Chestnut Hill in South Brookline, they did stop all their construction work in occupied buildings. And there were a few other, scattered projects around town that had voluntarily ceased operations as well to, I think, to show some level of cooperation with their tenants and, and some of the residents.
I would just add to that. I hear what you're saying, Mr. Fernandez, and I think after the governor issued his order, it probably would have been more appropriate for the town to narrow its voluntary order, but we chose not to do that. So I take your point about consistency in messaging.
I don't know where we're going to be on this. If we were to take a vote, for instance, I think we've at least got to get our messaging together as to whether or not, in the governor's order, whether or not we think construction should continue or not. And if folks think that that we shouldn't vote to discontinue it on our own because that would be inconsistent with the governor's office, I would love to know whether or not the board thinks that we should at least send a message to the governor that we think construction should be stopped based on the concerns from the working people on these sites who are telling us that they don't think it's safe, that the nature of the work itself is not safe for them to show up, and even including now people literally walking off the job because of these concerns. I don't know if everyone's there or not, but.
Well, can I just add a thought? As I understand it from Mr. Bennett, he is not permitting what you would call non-essential, like renovations, for instance. That's not really adding to the housing stock. So I would hope that applies to whether it is in a building with a lot of other tenants, et cetera, or just a house. And I know, having been there, that it's frustrating not to get your project done. But on the other hand, I think it's difficult, very difficult, to keep people safe on those indoor kinds of spaces. They're just not big enough. So, Mr. Bennett, could you just tell us about whether you have limited, whether, if I understood you correctly, you have limited the housing to new housing and not any renovation of any sort?
Yeah, so unless the renovation was, within a week or two of allowing a unit to be reoccupied, and that would be some sort of discretion on our part. One of the issues of the projects that we get a lot of is renovation of existing units. If the unit was within the May 4th deadline of being occupied, I would probably let that project continue on so that we could open up a unit for occupancy. I understand that didn't create, it was an existing unit that was not newly created, but it would allow a unit to be occupied. But I would not let any new renovation work begin, or one that was in its early stages. I would close that down and prevent them from working as well. So if the project was near completion and ready to reoccupy, I'd probably let that continue on. and I'd use the May 4th date as guidance, and then we could go from there.
Here's an idea. I'm not willing to unilaterally ban construction here in Brookline, irrespective of what unions are saying, for example. But I would be willing to convey by letter or whatever to the governor a suggestion that during this current really hot period with respect to the virus, that that he place a moratorium on construction. Maybe to the end of the month after we get through this the period where we're going to have some spikes in cases and deaths. I think that is a useful way of indicating to the governor that we are concerned about the current health situation, and think that at least a moratorium would be a way to reduce the risk that we're facing at this time. What do people think of that idea?
I would be open to putting my name on a letter asking for a moratorium just through the end of the month.
I agree with that.
I'm fine with that.
One last person.
That's the best we could do right now. Then of course I would.
I think that's very good. It's not lesser of two evils or something or whatever you call it.
Just my thought on it.
Okay. Okay. The question is, who's going to do that? I mean, I'm willing to take a draft or take a stab at drafting something. You're working with people who know something, like Mr. Bennett.
All right. Well, maybe Mr. Bennett and Mr. Kleckner can also collaborate on a draft for us to review and send to the governor, urging him to impose moratorium.
I will be happy to do that. I don't think it's really a complicated message. It's pretty simple.
Doesn't sound like it.
And we'd be happy to craft that and send that on behalf of the board.
Okay. So, do we need to vote on that?
I think it would be worthwhile.
Okay. So I move that we direct Mr. Bennett and Mr. Kleckner to draft a letter to the governor urging him to impose a moratorium on construction to the end of the month during and including that we are concerned about the health or the virus situation during the next few weeks. Is that clear?
Yes.
Okay. So all in favor, Mr. Franco?
Aye.
Ms. Heller?
Aye.
Ms. Hamilton?
Aye.
Mr. Fernandez?
Aye.
And chair votes aye. Okay, that's over.
Mr. Chair, I have one other item that I'd like to just raise under this mitigation, COVID mitigation issue.
Great.
And that has to do with the about towns' tax payments and other provisions to allow people to defer obligations or to waive certain penalties and interest. So the governor has signed legislation late last week that would allow, it doesn't mandate, but it allows individual cities and towns to defer their current due property tax that's due on May 1st, to defer that until June 1, so 30 days. There's also another provision, again, allowing the town to avoid waiving penalties and interest for delinquent payments through a certain period of time. And the third one is escaping me for a moment, but it's in a similar vein. And although it wasn't time to put this on the select board's calendar for a vote, given the timing of the legislation, it is something that staff will recommend to the board that we adopt as a consumer protection or accommodation to our residents and taxpayers. And we'd like to be able to, assuming some discussion and consensus of the board, we would still need to take a formal vote next week. But if you had the consensus that we're supportive of that, we would probably try to get the word out that we're going to make that recommendation, because I know that there's a lot of people contacting you all and our Treasury Department asking those questions. Specifically, I think right now the big one is the May 1st property tax date.
Is there anyone on the board who would object to this? It seems fairly straightforward and a very good thing for us to do for people who are, probably
People who are
unable.
struggling. Yeah. For people who are struggling, I mean, it's definitely something we should.
Yeah, and even for people who are not financially struggling, the stress of this current situation, makes it difficult for them to have to do a lot of things, and this is one of them. So
I did find that second one. So we had the extension of the property tax bills from May to June, and then we had also to extend the due date for applications for tax exemptions and tax deferrals, which I think is really important. And those would be, I believe, extended to a date not later than from April 1st to a date not later than June 1st. And then the final one was the local option to waive interest on certain payments that were made after the due dates. So again, all of those we strongly recommend that the board adopt. And without any objections, if I don't hear any objections, we will begin to advertise that, of course, conditional on the board's formal vote next week.
Okay, I don't hear any objections.
Fully supportive of this.
Yeah,
definitely.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, next. Special town meeting. Question of calling a special town meeting within the 2020 annual town meeting. Mr. Kleckner, what's this about?
It's technical.
Yeah,
and I'm going to ask if the Deputy Town Administrator, Melissa Goff, is available to pick up on this one.
Sure. Good evening, everyone. I hope everyone can hear me.
Yep.
Okay, so you should have received a memo in your packet. I believe that Ben discussed earlier this evening that they're currently exploring a virtual town meeting. There's currently no legislation that allows for this type of meeting to happen. So as a boot and suspenders measure, there may be legislation that eventually gets passed, but currently there is not. So the moderator is recommending that we call a special town meeting for the purpose of inserting all of the articles that would be taken at our virtual town meeting. And then that would allow us to ensure that the measures that are passed at the annual town meeting are able to be ratified. So what you have in front of you is a recommended vote for the board that allows you to call the special town meeting, and then also a draft of the only article in that special town meeting, which would allow for the filing of that special legislation. And once we have more information about when the town meeting date is, I know that's not set in stone quite yet, and the type of platform that we're going to be using, we would then refine the motion to make sure that that detail is in there.
Great. Any questions? I move approval of the question of calling a special town meeting within the 2020 annual town meeting. All in favor, Mr. Franco?
Aye.
Ms. Heller?
Aye.
Ms. Hamilton?
Aye.
Fernandez?
Aye.
And chair votes aye.
Thank you.
That concludes our
That vote
business.
would handle all the other waivers that would be required. Is that right, Melissa?
We will still do the traditional noticing that we do in the paper and in the listserv. It just we aren't under the time constraints of those requirements.
I was specifically referencing the opening of the warrant.
That's part of what the board is waiving in the vote.
I wanted to be clear about that. Okay.
Yes.
So we're not going to entertain any other articles for this special town meeting. It's only for the sole purpose of doing this technical vote. That's
correct.
Required.
So we don't have to specifically say that we're opening the warrant and then closing it?
So that should be in the memo that I outlined. You're waiving the provisions of the sections in the bylaw that would have required you to do that.
Okay, do we need to vote that specific language?
You can either refer to my memo or use the vote that I've actually outlined in the memo as well.
Okay, we already voted, so. Let me wake up my computer.
So it's waiving the requirements of sections 2.1.2 through 2.1.4 of the town's bylaw to open and close the warrant and to insert in the said warrant the following article.
Okay, I move Mr. Franco's explanation of what we're voting on. All in favor, Mr. Franco?
Aye.
Ms. Hamilton? Mr. Keller?
Aye.
Hamilton? Ms. Fernandez?
Aye.
And chair votes aye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, that concludes our business for tonight. Anything else?
Please complete your census and give to the Safety Net Fund if you can. Thank you.
Yes. Very important. Both are financially important to the town.
Right.
Okay. Okay. We're adjourned.